Okay, good evening. We are live. This is The Secret, How to Fight CPS and Win. I'm attorney Vince Davis, and I'm joined by my co-host, Miss Cassandra Woodard. Miss Woodard, how are you this evening?
I'm good.
Good, good. And I see we have a very special guest tonight, Miss Alexandria. Miss Alexandria, how are you this evening?
I'm good.
Good. Where are you where are you from? Where are you located?
Indiana.
Indiana. You ever been to Gary, Indiana?
Nope.
Never been to Gary?
No, and I probably won't ever visit. I've not heard very good things about it.
Yeah. But you know what made Gary, Indiana famous, right?
Possibly depending on what you think, because I've, like I said, heard
Well,
bad things about it. So,
okay, well, aren't the Jackson Five from Gary, Indiana?
um, I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so the show is about CPS, about trying to fight CPS, get your children back. So you must have a CPS issue in the state of Indiana.
Yeah, it's not a current issue.
Hmm. Mhm.
My family and I dealt with them back in 2020.
And
For I think it was 8 months, I believe.
what happened?
Um, well, um, I'm not too sure where to start, I guess. I had gotten pregnant and or found out I was pregnant in August of 2019, which was a surprise. I wasn't expecting it. So I had gotten pregnant. I found an OB doctor and started going. And then I'll just skip forward a little bit because I don't want to go waste too much time on a backstory. But when I gave birth to my daughter, when I went into the hospital the day after I had her, CPS showed up asking to ask us questions. And we're like, okay, like, why are you here? And this and that. And she had the way she said it originally was that there the call the report that come in was due to supposed drug use by the father.
And then what
So
happened?
she pretty much gave us this timeline of everything she needed to get done. She started asking us questions about our kids and situation. She had asked us to submit to a drug test, which I had no problem with. Um, and then my fiance ended up submitting to one. And then she had asked about seeing our other children and wanting to interview our oldest, which was a whole mess. I went in Wednesday to have my daughter, and we weren't able to leave until Friday because she was doing this investigation and had apparently was waiting. I'm guessing, I'm not 100% sure, but she was like talking with the nurses and stuff. They pretty much held us there for an extra 24 hours because they wanted to see if my daughter was going to have drugs in her system.
Did somebody report you as a possibility for having drugs?
Um she she had, that's what she had said, that there was supposed drug use by the father, and then it was reported that from my, well, I guess she didn't say who, but I know who pretty well, I guess, but that there was drug use during my pregnancy, which there was not, but somehow it shows in like paperwork that there was, which I have no idea how, but
Well, did they take your children from you?
not right away. We ended up, we were really in a frenzy and in shock from what she was telling us. We have never dealt with CPS beforehand, with our other children or anything like that. Never even had a report made or anything. So we didn't know what to do. We ended up just talking to her, and we had went home that Friday, and she was still contacting me to get, I guess she wanted paperwork signed from me that she could get, I think it was my medical information and my daughter's. And I had told her when she had asked about it, because I believe she texted me, it was either, yeah, we went home Friday, so I believe it was Saturday. She had come to our apartment and knocked on the door, and I didn't answer. I believe I was sleeping when she come. But she left these papers at my door and ended up texting me and said, "Hey, I left these papers at your door for you to sign. It's a release of information." I was like, "I'm not signing this until I talk to a lawyer." So I didn't sign the
Good for you.
papers. I didn't sign them. They're still unsigned to this day. Never signed them. But she left the papers there. I didn't sign them. She had wanted, I'm pretty sure she didn't even ask. She had told us before, or when she was at the hospital talking to us, that she would be in contact with us and that she would probably follow up with us like that next week at some point for anything, whether it be something or nothing. Well, Monday comes around, and about 7 p.m. that evening, there are people banging on my door, and it's the social worker with the police officers there to remove my children.
Did they have a warrant to remove your children?
Yes, they had an emergency custody order. So I don't know if that's technically the same as a warrant.
Yeah, it's either a warrant or a court order.
Okay, so yeah, either way is technically a court order.
Now, what month and year are we talking about?
April of 2020.
Okay, so they took your kids in April of 2020?
Yes.
And how long did it take to get them back?
The whole time that we dealt with CPS, it was 8 months. Well, okay, hold on. You asked me how long to get them back. It was from April to June. In June, she had signed off papers because we had completed everything. We had passed drug screens, the whole 9 yards. She had signed a petition through the court, or made an order that the kids could return home and just be an in-home Chin's case instead of out of home.
Okay. So they only were out of your home for about 2.5 months?
From April to June.
Okay. Now, did they ever prove anything against you that, like you were a danger or a risk to the children?
No. I guess the only proof they really had was when she had come to the hospital and asked us to do the drug test. My fiance did test positive for drugs, which I don't think he told her that he was going to, but he knew he was going to. But other than that, there was, like, prior to the call being made, or to the accusation or whatever, they had no proof of anything that was going on.
Well, how did they become alerted to your family? Did you ever find that out?
To an extent, because she said the call was anonymous, but most of the information they got, or she got, which I believe a lot was in violation of how she got it, like against or whatever, because I never signed any paperwork or anything. I did sign one paper, but the other ones she didn't have. She shouldn't have been able to get the information. But I believe it was my OB that called and reported. And when I did my other video with Cynthia, I had mentioned to her it's kind of like almost like a conspiracy thing. I believe it was my OB that called and reported me because apparently while I was seeing him for my pregnancy, he was putting in my paperwork that I was testing positive for meth.
And that was not true?
No. I mean, it shows like it's true in the paperwork, but I was not using meth. I've never have.
Did he take any drug tests or anything to show that you...
Yeah. Well, when I first went in to see him, the county that it was in, they had told me that, this county is well known for drugs, especially meth, and I knew that. So I was like, okay. So he's like, we test quite frequently, urine tests, drug tests. I'm like, okay, that's fine. This is my third kid, so I've had plenty of urine screens. Don't bother me at this point. Like, just do it. So the first, it was, I believe, my second appointment was on October 14th. I didn't know any of this until way later after the fact when we're dealing with CPS, when I got copies of my medical records. In my medical records, it shows on October 14th that I had tested positive for meth, and it says that it was 20 nanograms / milligrams. And then I have the paper here. It says, drug present methamphetamine. Sources of methamphetamine include illicit sources as a scheduled prescription medication, as a metabolic of some prescription drugs, or use of an L-methamphetamine inhaler.
Does it list any type of environmental contacts as possibilities?
No.
Because that particular, amount, I forgot what you said, but it seems like a very, very small amount.
Right.
Did he ever talk to you about this?
Nope. I didn't know until, like I said, I got my medical records myself that it was even in my papers.
At the time, you said your fiance was using drugs. Was he using methamphetamine at the time you were pregnant with your daughter?
Towards the end of my pregnancy, yes, but not at the beginning. So October would have been close to the beginning.
Oh, okay. Because I'm just saying, like, I've heard some stories about drug tests going wrong. One of my friends had actually had a drug test go wrong because she had sexual intercourse with her boyfriend the day before she went in to have her checkup from a doctor, and then it showed up that she was dirty for methamphetamine.
Yep. Well, it's interesting you bring that up because that's part of my story. When she come to remove the kids, she had told my fiance, like, they were grilling him because, he tested dirty, whatever. Like, and it's like, okay, we get that. Yeah, it's bad. It's a bad situation. He knows, but at the same time, he never did anything around our children, never did anything inside the home, never brought anything in the home ever. And personally, I didn't know that he was so far into doing what he was doing. He was very well at hiding it from me, which we've worked through that stuff. But anyway, so when they had come to remove the kids, he had asked her, he's like, well, isn't it possible that because I'm the one using, that she could have gotten contact through me and that's why she tested positive for it? She's like, no, that's not possible. But then another time she had told him that it was bad for him to be doing stuff, even if he wasn't doing it at home, it was still bad to do, and then come home and be around the children because it can be passed from him to the children, like through contact. So it's like, okay, yeah, he can do it through contact through the kids, but not through me.
Right. Well, she told you something that's obviously incorrect, and we only wonder whether she did that purposely or by mistake.
Right.
But if your partner is using an illegal drug, you can test positive for it if you have any type of physical contact, especially some type of intimate contact.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's a story that I remember. I represented somebody who tested positive for marijuana. Now, this is way, way back in the day before it was legal, probably in any state, but especially here in California. And, she swore to me up and down that she did not use marijuana. And as Cassandra said, her significant other was using marijuana. And, many times after he was using marijuana, inhaling it through his mouth, and they'd kiss. Well, the THC was still residue in his mouth or lips, and it was transferred to her. And so when she had to take a test, guess who came up positive for THC, marijuana? So a lot of times, this can happen unbeknownst to you. And, the real sad thing about it is they will start a case on you and you had no idea that the person was using drugs, illegal drugs. And they somehow hold you to the standard that you knew or you didn't know. Now, I don't know if you've spent time around people that have, that are addicts. Unfortunately, I have in my family. And, the use of drugs, illegal drugs, is something that's usually hidden. I mean, they're not sitting in the living room on the coffee table with all their drugs and their drugs paraphernalia, hanging out. They're doing this
Right.
in private, in secret, and keeping it from you.
Yep.
So, the way they do it in juvenile court, I think it's, a little unfair that you don't know. But I guess they take the position that how can they know if you ever knew or if you're just lying about it or, or it was being hidden from you. And I've seen that in a lot of cases over the years. One spouse is using drugs and the other spouse isn't. And sometimes, the non-using drug spouse knows, sometimes they know, but a lot of times they don't know, because it's just hidden. And then you get caught up in a CPS case like this, because your significant other, tests positive. Now, I don't know what the law is in, what state are you from? Indiana.
Indiana.
Yeah, Indiana. But in California, before a case starts, they ask you to take a drug test. You don't have to take a drug test,
Right.
right? You don't have to take a drug test. They're just asking you, or sometimes they tell you got to take a drug test. Well, you have the right to say no, thank you. No, thank you.
Right.
And when you go to court for the first time after the detention hearing in California, before the court takes jurisdiction, a lot of courts order you to take a drug test. Now, unless you and your attorney object to it, it becomes a court order. But theoretically, the judge doesn't even have the power then to force you to take a drug test. But you got to object to it,
Right.
right? And, even during the case, after the judge does take jurisdiction, you don't have to take a drug test. The problem is, if you don't do the drug test, you won't get your children back. Right?
Right.
So they can't compel you to do something, but there's significant consequences if you don't take the drug test. One of the issues that comes up all the time in these drug cases is the actual drug test itself. Well, I shouldn't say it comes up all the time, but it's an issue that I think should come up all the time. And that is, mother takes drug test, comes back positive, tells me I don't use drugs. And then we have an issue of, the drug test itself is a scientific test. And in California, and probably in most states, I know it's true in the federal system, in order for a scientific test to be used against you, it has to satisfy, some very tall hurdles to come into evidence. And then in CPS cases, I think it's a lot of times swept under the rug. People just, oh, social worker says I tested positive, must be true.
Right.
I was doing a case one time in Northern California, and they told my client, she's about 6 months into the case, and I come onto the case, and the judge orders her to go outside in the hallway to a little office next door to have a test for above all things, a test for alcohol. Given by some lady, I don't know who she is or what she does. My client takes a test and she comes back positive. So the judge starts making all of these orders on this positive test. And I said, well, wait a minute, judge. You know, who is that lady that took the test? Does she even know what she's doing? You know, what kind of test was that was administered? And then I said the magic words. Does it pass the Kelly Fry test or standards in California for scientific evidence to come into court? And the looks I got were like, you know, from all the other attorneys and maybe the judge. Is this guy like from Mars? Is he an alien? Like, what is he talking about? Like, we never challenged that. It's just she tested positive, man. And you know, I got down to it and I said, well, that lady who administered the test, what kind of qualifications does she have? Turns out she didn't have any qualifications. So the judge said, well, I'll erase all those orders if your client goes down and takes a test at the local drug facility that had a contract with the court. And, you know, if she comes back negative. So after the court hearing, we, you know, drive down there. It's only a few blocks away from the courthouse, as a matter of fact. She goes in, she takes a test, and she comes back clean. Do you know that the social workers for the rest of the case still tried to use that in-court test? You know, that's like some home remedy or home test, like if you're pregnant or not. Well, come on.
Right.
Look, you know, this is court. These people are going to lose their children. We got to do this the right way, you know, the professional way.
Yeah.
Anyway, that lady ended up getting back her kids because I always, they you know, as much as they wanted to bring it up, this in-court test given by some lady that's not qualified with who knows what equipment. I don't know what equipment she was using. You know, they kept bringing it up and I kept, you know, shooting it down. And finally they look kind of crazy. And I remember they put her on the stand one time at a hearing to try to qualify her or try to get information from her. And on cross-examination, I said, ma'am, do you have a college degree? No. Ma'am, you have a high school degree? Well, not really. And I'm like, well, what does not really mean? It's either yes or no. Right? So, I mean, this is what they were trying to do, trying to get things into evidence. You know, look, a drug test is a scientific test that has to meet the Kelly Fry standard in California. Period. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the person has to be, by the way, the person has to go through some formal training. Right?
Right.
It'd be like me. I don't know anything about test, but it'd be like me going to CVS drugstore, buying a pregnancy kit, you know, and telling you here, you know, now that would be some type of indication, but it doesn't, I don't think that meets the Kelly Fry standard for admissibility into a courtroom, especially over an important matter like, are you going to lose your kids?
Right.
Yeah. So when you were going through the process, did they make you take drug testing and drug counseling and everything?
Yeah, they did. Yep. We had to, both of us had to do random drug screens twice a week, just until for however long. Eventually, a few months in, I think 4 months or so, mine were dropped down to once a week. But even it's kind of crazy because even in the time that we were doing the drug testing, one of the ladies that had come to do our test was telling us that they had recently lost employees, that people were quitting. And she proceeds to tell us that their company is under investigation for false positive drug screens.
Yeah. You know, 5%, approximately 5% of all urinalysis tests are incorrect. You're either
Mm-hmm.
going to get a false positive or a false negative. But I don't think anybody brings that up or courts consider that in CPS cases. It's like, you know, the word of God has come down and the 10 commandments etched in stone. And they're not reliable. There's one county down here in Southern California. I don't know if they still do it, but it was kind of a travesty of justice. They were using something called a drug patch, right? And there's scientific articles out there about how crazy and unreliable drug patches are.
Mm-hmm.
But they were using this as a basis of taking kids away and keeping kids away.
Wow.
So, this has happened maybe within the last 10 years. I have a friend who brought a lawsuit against the county of San Diego. And what San Diego was doing was, on every case, even if it wasn't a sexual abuse case, they were sending the kids to the hospital to get sexual abuse examinations. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a sexual abuse examination, but it can be quite intrusive.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. So, even if you were taken away from your parents because of drugs, you got to go to the local children's hospital for a sex abuse exam, no matter,
Oh, wow.
how old you were. Kind of a standard practice. And, I've been doing this so long. At the time when my friend tells me this, I'm thinking, yeah, they do the same thing. I can see that being done. Social workers do kind of crazy things. But he sued them. And he sued them in federal court. And allegedly, I wasn't at the hearing. They were at one hearing. And a federal judge was outraged that the county was doing that. Outraged. And it turns out, my friend theorized this. Whenever a kid had a sexual abuse examination, whether they needed it or not, they got to bill the federal government an amount of money. Okay? And I'm going to say, I don't know if this was the amount, but let's just say it was $1,500 for every sexual abuse exam they had to give a kid. Okay? Whether the child needed it or not. The county paid the hospital, this is a number just as an example, paid $500 for the exam. Paid the hospital. But they billed the federal government for $1,500. Let's say that's the number. So you do the math. 1,500 minus 500 is 1,000. So for every kid that was going through the system, they were making $1,000 just on the sexual abuse exam. A lot of people don't believe that, there's a lot of economics that come into play in these CPS cases. And there are. There
Right.
definitely are. I just met with someone today who told me that his family has been split because his father has the kids and wants to adopt them and has told them that he needs and wants the money. He's making about $4,000 a month on multiple. He has, like 3 or 4 kids in his care. And he, is making it hard for his own child to get his kids back. Money is used by social workers to help convince caretakers and foster parents to keep children.
Right.
What it's America. What if you offer people money to keep your kids? You think they're going to be helpful in trying to get the kids back to you?
No.
No. The incentive isn't there.
Right.
Right? What if we started paying people $10,000 bonuses, every foster parent, if the kids went back to the parents? You change everything.
Yeah.
You change
Right.
everything. It just so happens that, the financial incentive is the other way. Keep the kids away. I told this story once before. Do you know who Arnold Schwarzenegger is? The actor?
Yeah.
He was governor of California at one time.
Yep.
Did you know that?
Yeah.
One of the things he did when he first got into office was he convened what they call the Hoover Commission. It kind of investigates government issues, government corruption and stuff on the CPS system here in California. And they came out with a report, and I tell people, I think you can Google it and find this report. They were very gentle on what they found, but one of the things they said was, The financial incentives are in the wrong place, and that should be changed. The financial incentives should be keeping the kids with the family, but yet the financial incentives are keeping the kid away from the family. Like,
Right.
don't pay DCF, don't pay CPS all the money to keep the kid away from the family. Pay them bonuses, to get the kids back. Like, how many kids you sending back?
Right.
But you see how money affects everything?
Oh yeah. And I believe that's a big part of why our case happened, because after it all started, I started looking online. Like at first it was just laws and what they could do, what they couldn't do, what we could do, and stuff like that. And I just kind of, each time I looked something up, it was like a rabbit hole. Like, okay, here's this and this and this. And then I had gotten into a different Facebook group, and these people were talking about how social services and DCS, CPS, all over the country is getting huge bonuses for removing children out of homes during COVID. So I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense as to probably almost 80% of the reason why this is going on right now, why we're having to deal with them, because they're getting bonuses for taking my kids.
Mm-hmm. Governmental entities are in the business of making money.
Mm-hmm.
You think they're just in the business of providing you services.
Yeah.
They're in the business of making money.
Yeah. And with the COVID going on too, I believe that there was probably some kind of coalition with the OB office as well that I was seeing. I was like, because what other reason would he have had to do these things? Because I just feel like that it's very likely he falsified my urine screens, because there should have been no way that I had tested for anything, at least the first time that he mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the social worker had come to the hospital and talked to us, she made the point that I had tested positive twice during my pregnancy. Now, like I said, I didn't know about it until I got my medical records. And I'm like, what are you talking about? No, I didn't. She's like, yes, it shows that you did. I was like, what do you mean? So I got my medical records and I go back and look, and there was one positive urine screen in October for the low amount of 20 nanograms. And then there was one in January.
Well,
I'm like, what is going on?
Well, here's something, because, we sue some social workers sometimes for civil rights violations. And when you get down to it, everyone blames CPS.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times rightfully so. But who do you think was responsible for all of this starting?
Oh, it was definitely my OB, I believe.
Who do you think, Cassandra?
To be honest,
Yeah.
To be honest, her fiance.
He started a snowball that just got bigger and bigger and bigger, never having any idea that this would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he did something. You may have tested positive for a small amount because of your interaction with him. And then the social workers, you just gave the social worker, something to take and run with. And they take it and run with it, for sure.
Right. Yeah. And I didn't even know about it. And then I just drew a blank on what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
That's all right. But
my OB, when I had discussed with him, when he brought it up in January that I had tested positive, being towards the end of my pregnancy, I was tired. I was uncomfortable. I hadn't got much sleep the night before. So he's talking about this and I just start bawling. I'm like, how would I have anything in my system? And my first response was, does that mean there's something in my baby's system? And he's like, well, it's very possible. Well, then I just lost it. I just start bawling because, like, I don't care about me. I care about my baby. And if something's wrong with my baby, like, that's not okay with me. So I got to figure this out.
Right.
But even still, at that point, he still didn't tell me about the original test in October. And he never offered me a retest because I had told him when he told me about me testing positive the second time, I was like, I don't use drugs. Like, I don't. And I especially never would being pregnant.
Yeah, but we were talking earlier about the other ways you can test positive without actually using the drug,
Right. Which
right?
nobody else really ever brought that up. Like, he never
Yeah,
brought that up. The social workers, nobody. And when we brought it up, it was pretty much just, no, that's not possible. Shut your mouth. This is how it is.
right. Well, that's, they're operating on the wrong assumption, but a fact that may be true because you did test positive for being in contact with someone who uses drugs. You know,
Right.
everyone thinks that if you test for drugs, even you, that it meant that you were using drugs, and that's not the right standard. The
Right.
standard is, hey, did I come in contact with that drug somehow? And you don't always know,
Right.
right? You don't have to answer this, but in your entire life, have you been at a party or at a gathering of friends and they're using marijuana or
Yep.
other substances, right?
Yep.
Believe it or not, that shit's floating around in the air in the room you're in. And then
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
you go test and you test positive. It's like, that must be wrong. It must be corruption. And quite honestly, it wasn't. It was you picking up something accidentally, but we always believe that had to have been from personal use, and that's not true.
Right.
And that's when the levels of the drug in your system become important. See, the test that you had, it was a very small amount. So if somebody had interpreted that, I actually heard some testimony several years ago from a pharmacologist in a case where, the pharmacologist testified and opined that, based upon the amounts in the system, sometimes they can tell or guess or give an opinion that, oh, this wasn't from personal use. It may have come from some type of contact with something else or somebody else,
Right.
right? So, that's the problem. Did you ever think about that, about what Cassandra, and I do agree with Cassandra, have you ever thought before today, being on the show, that it was not, or it could have been not the doctor's fault or CPS's fault, that it might have been your fiance's fault? And what
Yeah.
happened is, these other people, they took it and ran with it. You ever think of that
Right.
before?
Yeah. I mean, when the doctor had talked to me about when stuff had showed up in my system this second time, I guess, I had called my fiance like soon as I left the doctor's office, and then he had told me, yes, I used so and so day, whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, if this is an issue, and then it's going to be an issue where it's going to show up in my system, then like I'm done. I'm not doing this. Like, we can't risk our children. We're not risking our baby. So, I mean, we did have serious conversation, and he was like, you're right. And he apologized to me. He's like, if that's the case, that's why you tested positive. He felt horrible, absolutely horrible. I mean, so it wasn't, the type of thing where it was just like, he didn't care or anything like that. Like, he genuinely felt horrible about it.
Right.
But then at the same time, like I said, we didn't know about the supposed first time of anything being in my system. And I quoted what was on the paperwork to you for a reason, actually, because on the 14th, we had been living with my mom for a little while. And on the 14th, we had finally gotten our own place. Like, we had come up that morning to sign the paperwork and pay our deposit to move into the apartment. So we did all that. And then I had a doctor's appointment later that afternoon. Well, me being pregnant, we were packing things like all day long. So in between the time of us signing for our apartment and like a half an hour before my doctor's appointment, we were loading the cars with all of our stuff, and I was dealing with my other child, you know, doing stuff with him. We had taken breaks for lunch, this and that. But I had been given an inhaler by a previous doctor years, like a year or two prior to this, from a time that I was sick. I had bronchitis. And because I'm a smoker, when I got bronchitis, it just like my chest was hurting so bad from being sick. So she gave me the inhaler to use. And just like any other medication or prescription, as you know, if it's still good or whatever, you can still use it whenever, if you don't fully use it all. Or if you don't feel like you don't need it, pitch it. You know, that's what they tell you. So that day I had used this inhaler. It was an albuterol inhaler. So I had used it that day. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, that might be one of the reasons why you came up positive that day.
That's what I was getting at. Like, that is like music to my ears right now. You don't even know. Yeah, I had brought that up to the social worker after a while because when I got the paperwork, like I said, when I got my medical records from the doctor, and it says in here that it's possibly from the use of an L-methamphetamine inhaler. And I had to look that up anyway. I was like, what does that mean? What's an L-methamphetamine inhaler? I've never heard of that. And one of the things that was coming up was an albuterol inhaler. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here I am all this time. I used that inhaler the same day I went to the doctor. I had used it prior that afternoon because I was getting winded from moving things and all that. So I had taken like 2 puffs off the inhaler. And then in the midst of doing research about this type of inhaler and it like corresponding with me, I had found an article from a lady in California that gave birth to her daughter or child. I don't know if it was boy or girl, I can't remember. But she had went in and had a baby, and she tested positive for methamphetamine when she went in. And they're like, you know, they had asked her if she had been using drugs or anything like that. They were trying to get CPS involved, and they're like, what kind of medications are you on? Well, then come to find out, she's like, the only thing, pretty much after a while, she's like, oh, my inhaler. Well, she used the inhaler, and then they waited so long and did another drug test, and it showed up positive for methamphetamine again.
Yeah. I mean, there's articles all over the internet about albuterol and other inhalers that can cause false positives for, you know, different illegal drugs. And if, you know, you got a CPS case, or, you know, you're going to have a problem convincing, you know, some judge.
I take a medication that actually shows up. If it metabolizes down in my body a certain way, it will show up as a false positive for another drug, but not methamphetamine. But I actually, right before I had my son, they tried to have a social worker come and talk to me about, since how long have I had a drug and alcohol problem? And I looked at her and I was like, what do you mean, since when do I have a drug and alcohol problem? And then and they stressed me out all night, and I ended up having to stay there extra long at the hospital for them to research and find out what was causing me to pop positive for this illegal drug. And it was my medication.
Right.
So it's happened to me.
Alexandria, we're coming towards the end of the show. Were there any questions that you wanted to ask me?
Yeah, I had a few.
Go ahead.
One of them was kind of relating to the inhaler, because, which I honestly truly believe that that's why I had the first positive. And like I said, I mean, it was unfortunate for me. Like I said, he never told me about it, so I wasn't able to do research at that point and then ask for a retest because he never told me about it. So unfortunately, like you said, it worked in CPS's favor later on. But it was at one point, the social worker had given us a book of like CPS guidelines and stuff, and pretty much just a breakdown of how things work with CPS and different services they offer and all that crap. Well, one day I'm just going through it, and there's a small tiny paragraph on this one page that says if you test positive for drugs due to a medication, they cannot take your children. So
The
I'm like,
problem is when do they know that? Because
right. And you would have
most
to
social
prove it.
workers, most social workers aren't educated on these possibilities.
Right.
While we were just talking, I just Googled what medications can cause false positive on drug test, ? And there's a bunch of them. So here's one. I actually had a case like this where amphetamine false positive was caused by an antidepressant that was prescribed to one of my clients called Wellbutrin. And Wellbutrin is, a very, I won't say popular, but very, it's prescribed a lot for depression and things like that. Antidepressant, right? Well, you got all these people being prescribed Wellbutrin, and heaven forbid they take a drug test, either at work or, while they have a CPS case or at the hospital giving a birth. And if nobody's clued into that, you're labeled as a drug user, a meth user, and you got to lose your kid.
Yep.
And the sad thing is a lot of people don't even know it. They never put the connections together.
Right.
Did you know that ibuprofen, like Advil and Motrin, can cause a false positive for illegal barbiturates?
I didn't know that.
You can test positive for cannabis by just using a topical CBD oil.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another. I just looked at this. I didn't know this, but this happened actually in a case. Luckily, it was disposed of by the judge. A woman tested positive for cocaine in her umbilical cord. Okay. Kid tested negative. Mom tested negative, but there was cocaine found in her system. Well, going back through her history, right before she even knew she was pregnant, she had something in another country called coca tea. It's tea, and it
Mm-hmm.
tests positive for cocaine. Right?
Wow.
There's a antipsychotic medication that people are on called Seroquel. It often tests positive for heroin and other opiates.
Yep. I've heard of that one. I've heard of that one causing issues with tests and stuff.
I've heard people scoff at this in the legal system, but Benadryl can make you test positive for opioids.
Mm-hmm.
And not only Benadryl, but poppy seeds.
Yeah.
So, you can get in these problems very easily, and it's not always because you're using drugs. But here's the other side of it. And Miss G's not here to yell at me for this, but if you're a judge who's given the responsibility of protecting children, okay, that's your job. And if you don't do your job well, you're going to be in big trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if a woman comes in front of you and says, "Judge, I don't use drugs. I don't know how I tested positive for meth." What do you do?
I don't know. I wish I would have had that opportunity when we went to court, but our public defender told us we weren't allowed to say anything. We just had to sit there and shut up, pretty much.
Yeah.
So,
Cassandra, what do you think? What would you do if you were Judge Woodard and Alexandria came in front of you with a quote positive drug test from a hospital, and she tells you, "Judge, I don't do meth." What do you say? What?
I'd retest her.
But what if it's some type of medication she's on? People don't think of that.
Yeah.
right? They don't think of
Yeah.
that.
I got lucky in order of like my doctors. I was a mad pregnant woman, and I yelled at my doctor, "You guys better find out what's making me pop positive." I have no idea. The drug they told me I was high on or whatever, I was all like, "I've never even heard of that. What is that?" I was scared and really yelling at them and everything else. And they came back the next morning because it was at a learning hospital. They came back the next morning with a group of doctors and the interns, and then they told me that it was my medication, and I was like, whew, like I got mad.
Right. Okay, well, any other questions for me, Alexandria?
I had a couple, but I mean, we didn't get to everything in my story, but there was quite a bit that happened within our case that just wasn't right. So since I've honestly, like probably about the last month, I've been more into watching your videos, Cassandra, Miss G's, and just everybody's, and I'm like, well, I'm really honestly curious if I would be able to have a civil suit for my children being taken without good reason, and then other things that happened throughout our case that just I believe were illegal, whether not just with CPS but also because of my doctor's office.
It's tough. One of your problems with a case, now I don't know your case, okay? I've never reviewed it. But what if you have someone on the jury or a judge who you tell your story to and they say the same thing Cassandra said? That's why all of the time, cases against social workers aren't slam dunk.
Right.
Because there's other things that happen, and I find this often. I'll talk to someone about their case, and as they get to know me and I get to know them and we have a stronger relationship, I learn more and more about the case.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always positive, right?
Right.
Well, why didn't you tell me on the first day? Well, Mr. Davis, I was embarrassed. Well, Mr. Davis, if I told you that, I didn't think you would take the case.
Right.
So, there's a lot of different factors. Whether you have a good civil rights case or not, I don't know. I'd have to review your file. Someone today told me that they had a case where there was almost 4,000 pages. He says, I want you to review it for me and tell me if I have a case. I said,
Oh, wow.
How many pages is it? And I'm thinking he's going to say like 200 or 300, right? He says probably a little over 4,000.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, I'm sorry, I wouldn't review that. I'd probably charge you. He says, well, I don't want to pay you any money until you review it and tell me if I have a case. I said, over 4,000 pages? Really? You want me to do that for free? I said,
Oh
do you
my
have
gosh.
how long that's going to take me?
The rest of your life, probably. That'd probably be the last case.
It's like, come on, man, 4,000 pages.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, Cassandra, were you going to say something?
Oh, no.
Hey, Alexandra, let me ask you something. Have you ever, you're a veteran of this system. Have you ever thought about becoming a host for one of our shows?
Yeah, it crossed my mind once.
Are you interested in? Because if you are, I will have Grace, our producer, contact you. And generally, it's only, once a week for 45 minutes to an hour. You don't have to do it every day, and it just gives people a different perspective, and it gives people information, that are going through these types of things.
Mhm.
I've had a lot of people, especially in the last year, tell me, man, your videos really helped a lot, because it gives me information that I would not have normally thought of,
Right.
and he's so one person told me, I really like to hear the stories of other people and what they went through, because I get to compare it with my story or my journey with CPS,
Right.
right? Because everybody thinks the law is what's important, and I'm not trying to downplay the law, but the other thing that is important, are the different things that could just happen in a case that you don't really consider or think of,
Yep.
you know. Anyway, please consider that, Alexandria, and see if you want to do a show. It could be any day of the week, Sunday through Saturday, or you can do 30-minute, 45-minute show, but at least you can start talking to people, interacting, and sharing what experiences you have. You seem to
Okay.
be very knowledgeable, well-spoken.
Yeah. And I actually was just doing some research the other day, which I kind of wanted to mention on the show just for people that do listen. Because I never thought about it. Like I said, we had gotten a book from the social worker about like basic information of just an overview of DCS, pretty much is what it was. Wasn't nothing fantastic. But I was looking up stuff about prenatal neglect because that's something else they threw on me in my case, which I had talked to Cynthia about. And she had looked it up and informed me that it's not illegal to not go to an actual OB facility while you're
That's
pregnant.
true. That's true.
Mind blown to me. So anyway, I was looking that up again just for my own personal knowledge, whatever. And I come across this PDF file and I still have it saved. And I've been looking through it off and on the last couple of days. It's like a full breakdown of how CPS works and even some of their policies and things they're supposed to do, like the whole interview investigation process, CHIN's process, the different types of abuse, how they're supposed to handle it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I had all this when my case was going on.
Well, you know what? Do me a favor. Do me a favor, because I don't know if we have access to that. On tomorrow's show, it'll be on at 7 p.m. Come on the show. You don't even have to appear on the screen. Go to YouTube, okay, and watch it
Okay.
on YouTube, and then upload that in the comments section.
Okay.
Okay, and then Grace will get it and start spreading it around, the internet on
Okay.
these shows that we do, and it might be very helpful to someone. That's what
Right.
I'm talking about. See, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about. You have an experience that neither I have, or you know something that I don't know, and Cassandra doesn't know, right? And unless you share that idea with the, thousands of people that come across this show, no one's ever going to know about it.
Right.
But it's such an important thing that people find out this information so that
Yeah.
they can better defend themselves when they have a CPS case.
Right. And the information I have is just specifically for Indiana. But I mean, I just assume, if there's one like this for Indiana, a whole PDF thing, there should be one for every state.
Yeah, I would
You would
agree.
think,
I would
so.
agree. The interesting thing is laws from state to state are not exactly the same. They're very similar because they're all based upon federal regulations from the Department of Health and Human Services. So if you see something in California, you might want to ask your attorney in Indiana, hey, is this the law in Indiana? And he or she may say, well, no, it's a little bit different, blah, blah, blah. But at least you know the issue. When you go to law school, they say that knowing the law is not the important part. It's the issue spotting to know what could be important in a particular factual scenario.
Right.
They call it issue spotting. So if you give people information and they read it, even if though it is for Indiana, it'll give them issue spotting ideas that they can talk to their attorney about in Texas or in Oregon.
Right.
Right. We just had someone, this has happened more than once, but we've had people call from especially Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the UK, talking about CPS. And apparently it's a system that's has grown over the decades to start affecting people, in all over at least the Western world. I have a client. Well, she's not a client anymore. The case is over. I represented her in a case in Northern California. She was from Pakistan, right? And she eventually, after the case was over, eventually went back to Pakistan. And every once in a while on WhatsApp, she'll say hi to me. And she's been living in Pakistan. And I said, hey, do they have a CPS in Pakistan? She said, well, she kind of laughed. She goes, not really, but we do have something, but it's nothing like CPS, in America. And
Mm-hmm.
it's probably because the financial incentives are completely different.
Right.
We pay people to take your kids away from you, and we pay
Yep.
them a lot of money.
Yeah. And
And there's this whole system out there of foster care, social workers, attorneys, judges that are devoted nothing but to the CPS system, the CPS machine.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we found that out the hard way because even like our public defender, the one I had, he had originally told me, well, I have experience with CPS cases. So I'm like, okay, well, hopefully this is going to be a good thing for us. No, come to find out, he was probably on their side from the beginning and just went along with their ride. I was like, well, that's nice.
Yeah. I hear that a lot.
So,
I hear that a lot.
yep.
Anyway, we're way past the end of the show. I want to thank you, Miss Alexandria, for coming on, sharing your story. Please consider being a host for one of our shows. If you want to come back on and finish your story, let Grace know. Grace at vincentwdavis.com. Miss Cassandra Woodard, thank you for co-hosting tonight. I really appreciate it. Everyone out there, we're going to be on tomorrow at 7 p.m. And just to let everyone know, to accommodate Miss G, our weekend shows now start at 9:30 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. That's a change from starting at 9 a.m. Okay? All righty, folks. Everyone have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow at 7. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.